Few cities on Earth have witnessed more history than London. For 2,000 years, this city on the banks of the River Thames has stood at the center of conquest, revolution, empire, and reinvention. It has been burned to the ground, ravaged by plague, bombed from the sky. And yet it has risen, every single time, more powerful than before. London is not merely a city, it is the story of the Western world itself. This is its history. The story begins not with British kings, but with Roman boots on British soil. In 43 AD, Emperor Claudius ordered the invasion of Britain, and 4 Roman legions crossed the English Channel under the command of General Aulus Plautius. Within weeks, the legions had pushed inland, crossing the River Thames and establishing a strategic military position at its northern bank. They called it Londinium. The Romans built a wooden bridge across the Thames, the first bridge ever to span that river, and Londinium rapidly grew into a thriving port and trading hub. By 60 AD, Londinium had already become the most important commercial settlement in Roman Britain. But then came fire, and one of the most dramatic uprisings the Roman Empire would ever face. In 60 AD, Queen Boudicca of the Iceni tribe rose in rebellion against Roman rule. Her husband, King Prasutagus, had died and left his kingdom jointly to Rome and his daughters. But Rome ignored his wishes and seized everything. Roman soldiers flogged Boudicca and assaulted her daughters. The response was apocalyptic. Boudicca gathered an army of over 100,000 warriors and swept across Roman Britain, destroying everything in her path. Londinium, undefended and unprepared, was burned to the ground. Archaeological excavations beneath modern London still reveal a thick layer of red ash, the scorched fingerprint of Boudicca's fury. Roman governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus eventually crushed the revolt, and Londinium was rebuilt, this time in stone. By the 2nd century AD, Londinium was at its height, a city of 45,000 people, the largest in Roman Britain. It had a basilica, a forum, an amphitheatre, and a governor's palace that rivaled anything in the Western Roman Empire. The Romans surrounded the city with a massive defensive wall, fragments of which still stand in the heart of modern London today. But empires do not last forever. In 410 AD, the Emperor Honorius withdrew the Roman legions from Britain, leaving Londinium to fend for itself. The city, once teeming with 45,000 people, was slowly abandoned. For over a century, the great Roman buildings fell silent, their marble floors buried beneath encroaching vegetation. Londinium became a ghost of itself. Then the Saxons came. Germanic tribes, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes began settling Britain from the 5th century onward. They largely avoided the ruins of Roman Londinium, establishing their own settlement just to the west along the Strand, a place they called Lundenwic. By the 7th century, Lundenwic had grown into a thriving market town, one of the most important trading ports in northern Europe. Christianity arrived in 597 AD, when Pope Gregory the Great sent Augustine to convert the Anglo-Saxons, and the city's first St. Paul's Cathedral was built in 604 AD. But peace in early medieval England was a fragile thing. From the late 8th century onward, Viking raiders from Scandinavia began terrorizing the British coastline. In 842 AD, a massive Viking force attacked Lundenwic and burned much of it to the ground. In 886 AD, King Alfred the Great of Wessex recaptured London and made the crucial decision to move the settlement back inside the protective walls of the old Roman city. Alfred reorganized the city, established new streets and markets, and began rebuilding London as a fortified urban centre. He called it Lundenburg, the fortified London. The Viking threat, however, never fully disappeared. In 1013, the Danish king Sweyn Forkbeard conquered all of England, forcing the Anglo-Saxon king Ethelred to flee into exile. London briefly fell under Danish control, only to be reclaimed by Ethelred upon Sweyn's death. Then came Sweyn's son, Canute, who in 1016 became king of all England, including London, ruling it with surprising competence and respect. Under the Anglo-Saxon King Edward the Confessor, London gained its most enduring landmark. In 1042, Edward began the construction of Westminster Abbey on Thorney Island, just upstream from the old city. Westminster would become the site of every English coronation from that day forward, the sacred heart of British monarchy. Then came the event that would transform England and London forever. On October 14th, 1066, at the Battle of Hastings, the Norman Duke William defeated the Anglo-Saxon King Harold II, killing him on the battlefield. William the Conqueror marched on London, and the city, recognizing the futility of resistance, submitted. On Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. To control this vital and restless city, William immediately began constructing the Tower of London, a massive stone fortress on the Thames that would serve as palace, prison, and symbol of Norman power for centuries. The White Tower, its central keep, still stands today, one of the most recognizable structures in all of England. Under Norman and then Plantagenet rule, London exploded in size and importance. By the 12th century, London had become the undisputed capital of England, the seat of royal government, the centre of trade, and the most populous city in the British Isles. The original London Bridge, a stone structure completed in 1209 after 30 years of construction, became one of the wonders of medieval Europe, its span lined with houses, shops, and even a chapel. Merchants from across Europe flocked to London's markets, and the city's wealth grew at a staggering pace. But wealth and power always breed conflict. In 1215, a group of rebellious barons forced King John to sign the Magna Carta at Runnymede, just outside London. This document, the Great Charter, established for the first time that even a king was subject to the rule of law. London's support for the rebel barons had been crucial, and in recognition, the Charter guaranteed the city's ancient rights and liberties. The Magna Carta is considered the foundation stone of constitutional government, and London was at its heart. Then came the catastrophe that no charter and no king could prevent. In the summer of 1348, the Black Death arrived in England. Within 18 months, London lost between a third and half of its entire population. The streets that had once rung with the noise of commerce fell silent, except for the cries of the dying and the grinding of death carts on cobblestones. Mass graves were dug outside the city walls, some so large that archaeologists are still uncovering them today. The plague returned again and again over the following century, each wave stripping away another layer of London's population. And yet, London survived. Each time, the city rebuilt, repopulated, and grew larger than before. The 15th century brought dynastic war, the Wars of the Roses, as the houses of York and Lancaster fought for the English throne. When Henry Tudor defeated Richard III at Bosworth Field in 1485 and became King Henry VII, he founded the Tudor dynasty that would define England for over a century. His son, Henry VIII, is perhaps the most famous English monarch who ever lived, and London was his stage. Henry VIII broke with the Roman Catholic Church, establishing the Church of England with himself as its supreme head. He dissolved the monasteries, seized their vast wealth and lands, and transformed London's religious landscape forever. He built palaces across the city: Whitehall, St James's, Greenwich and turned London into one of the most magnificent royal capitals in Europe. His daughter, Elizabeth I, took the throne in 1558 and presided over what many consider the golden age of English civilization. Under Elizabeth, London's population exploded past 200,000 people. The Globe Theatre opened on the South Bank, where William Shakespeare staged his greatest plays to audiences drawn from every level of society. English explorers sailed from London's docks to the ends of the earth. Drake, Raleigh, Hawkins, mapping new continents and establishing the first threads of what would become the British Empire. And in 1588, London erupted in celebration when the English fleet, against all odds, defeated the Spanish Armada, the greatest naval force the world had ever seen. But the Elizabethan Golden Age gave way to darker times. On November 5th, 1605, a Catholic conspirator named Guy Fawkes was discovered in the cellars beneath the Houses of Parliament with barrels of gunpowder in a plot to blow up King James I and the entire Parliament. The gunpowder plot failed, but it sent shockwaves of religious paranoia through English society that would take decades to subside. Tensions between King and Parliament escalated throughout the early 17th century until they exploded into the English Civil War in 1642. London sided decisively with Parliament against King Charles I. In January 1649, Charles I was put on trial in Westminster Hall and found guilty of treason against his own people. On January 30th, 1649, King Charles I was beheaded outside the banqueting house on Whitehall, the first time in English history that a reigning monarch had been publicly executed. England became a republic, the Commonwealth, under the iron rule of Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell's rule proved as authoritarian as the king he had replaced, and after his death, London greeted the restoration of King Charles II in 1660 with enormous relief and celebration. But London's greatest trials were still to come. In the summer of 1665, the Great Plague struck London with terrifying force. Over 100,000 people, a quarter of London's entire population, died within a single year. The wealthy fled to the countryside. The poor were left to die in the streets. Red crosses were painted on the doors of infected houses, and the cries of "Bring out your dead!" echoed through empty streets. Then, before the city had even recovered from the plague, came the fire. In the early hours of September 2nd, 1666, a fire broke out at a bakery on Pudding Lane. Fanned by strong winds, the Great Fire of London burned for 4 days and 4 nights. It destroyed over 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and most of the medieval city that had stood for centuries. Incredibly, the official death toll was only 6. But 100,000 people were left homeless. From the ashes of the Great Fire, London was reborn. The architect Christopher Wren was commissioned to redesign the city, and his masterpiece, the new St. Paul's Cathedral, rose over London's skyline, a dome of stone and faith that has defined the city ever since. The 18th century saw London transformed into the capital of a global empire. The East India Company, headquartered in the City of London, brought the wealth of Asia pouring through London's docks. The slave trade enriched London's merchants enormously, a dark and inescapable stain on the city's imperial history. By 1800, London had become the largest city on Earth, with over 1 million inhabitants. The Bank of England, the Stock Exchange, and Lloyd's of London turned the city into the financial capital of the world. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and London was transformed again. Steam power, railways, and industry poured workers into the city from across Britain and Ireland. By 1850, London's population had reached 2.5 million, making it by far the largest city in the world. But this explosive growth came at a terrible cost. The Thames became an open sewer, its waters black with industrial waste and human filth. In the summer of 1858, the stench became so overwhelming that Parliament itself was forced to suspend its sessions, an event known as the Great Stink. The engineer Joseph Bazalgette responded with one of the greatest infrastructure projects in history, a vast network of underground sewers that cleaned London's water and saved countless lives. Queen Victoria's reign saw London reach the peak of its imperial power. The Great Exhibition of 1851, held in the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, showcased Britain's industrial and technological supremacy to the entire world. The London Underground, the world's first subway system, opened in 1863, transforming urban life forever. By the end of the Victorian era, the British Empire covered a quarter of the Earth's surface, and London sat at the centre of it all. The 20th century brought London face to face with a scale of destruction it had never known. When World War I broke out in 1914, London sent hundreds of thousands of its sons to the trenches of France and Belgium. Zeppelin airships brought the war directly to London's streets for the first time, dropping bombs on a civilian population that had never known aerial attack. When the war ended in 1918, London mourned its dead at the Cenotaph on Whitehall, a ceremony still observed every year. But the Second World War would test London beyond anything that had come before. When Adolf Hitler launched his campaign to destroy Britain's will to resist in September 1940, London became the primary target. For 57 consecutive nights, the German Luftwaffe bombed London relentlessly, a campaign of terror known as the Blitz. Over 43,000 civilians were killed across Britain, and over 1 million London homes were damaged or destroyed. Yet Londoners refused to break. They sheltered in underground stations, sang songs in the dark, and queued for rations with a defiant humour that became legendary. Prime Minister Winston Churchill captured the spirit of the city when he declared that London could take it. And London proved him right. St. Paul's Cathedral survived the Blitz almost miraculously, its great dome rising above the smoke and flames, a symbol of London's unbroken spirit, photographed in one of the most iconic images in history. When the war ended in 1945, London was battered, exhausted, and broke. The British Empire, which had sent soldiers from every corner of the globe to fight for Britain, began its rapid dissolution. In 1948, the Empire Windrush arrived in London, carrying the first large group of Caribbean migrants invited to help rebuild post-war Britain. Over the following decades, London was transformed by wave after wave of immigration from the Caribbean, South Asia, Africa, and beyond. This transformation was not without tension. Racial violence, discrimination, and social conflict scarred London's post-war years. But from this diversity, a new London slowly emerged, one of the most cosmopolitan, creative, and culturally vibrant cities on Earth. In the 1960s, London became the center of a global cultural revolution. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and a generation of designers, artists, and photographers turned London into the style capital of the world. Carnaby Street and the King's Road became bywords for freedom, youth, and modernity. The city that had survived Roman conquest, Viking raids, Norman invasion, plague, fire, and the Blitz was now conquering the world with music, fashion, and art. The following decades brought new challenges: economic crises in the 1970s, IRA bombings that terrified the city through the 1970s and 1980s, and the urban riots of 1981 that exposed deep social fractures. But London absorbed each crisis and kept moving forward. Today, London stands as one of the great cities of the world, home to nearly 9 million people, speaking over 300 languages. It is simultaneously one of the world's leading financial centers, a global hub of art, music, theatre, and fashion, and the city still grappling with questions of identity, inequality, and belonging. The Thames, which the Romans first bridged 2,000 years ago, still flows through the heart of it all. And Londoners, as they have always done, look at whatever the world throws at them and say, we are still here. From a Roman military camp on a muddy riverbank to the capital of the greatest empire the world has ever seen, this is the story of London, a story of survival against every force history could assemble. Invaders, plague, fire, poverty, bombs, and time itself. For 2,000 years, London has refused to be anything less than extraordinary. See you in the past.